Circular solutions for nature and the economy is not a new topic to many of us online, with its importance definitely still on the growing agenda globally and in Australia. Today we have, we are privileged and grateful to have Dr. Nicole Garofano, Head of Circular Economy Development at Planet Ark, to share with us highlights from the World Circular Economy Forum in Helsinki, which took place just last week. Nicole is still currently on her learning tour and joins us from Sweden. Nicole, so pleased to have you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Flavia, and thanks to Camilla as well for including me and inviting me to present from Stockholm this morning. So, well, this morning, your afternoon, of course. Thank you to everybody online for choosing to allocate an hour of your precious time in your busy schedules to join the event today and hear these reflections. So as Flavia, next slide. Thanks, Flavia. As Flavia introduced, my name is Dr. Nicole Garofano. I'm the Head of Circular Economy Development at Planet Ark, and I'm responsible for the strategy of the Australian Circular Economy Hub, or the ACE Hub as we call it. The ACE Hub is the national reference platform for circular economy knowledge and collaboration in Australia. I have a PhD by research that focused on mapping the value chain of plastic food and beverage packaging material to identify innovations. And I've been at Planet Ark for 2 years, but I've worked in environmental education, community waste management, and program design and implementation for just shy of 20 years. But most recently, I've been traveling the Netherlands and Helsinki with a group of 11 wonderfully inspiring circular economy change makers from Australia and New Zealand, including Planet Ark's Chief Sustainability Advisor and co-founder Paul Klemenko, who's joining us on the call today. So morning, Paul. Also joining from our team is Sam Williams and Roisin O'Neill. So that's who I am and that's who we are, and drawing on the reflections of the group as well. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. So the basis of the study tour was to apply to attend, the original intention was to apply to attend the World Circular Economy Forum for Paul and I, which quickly grew into a delegation of interested parties and a 2-week study tour with 11 people from, as I mentioned, Australia and New Zealand. The objectives for the tour are listed on the slide here, with specific material and policy streams that were shown, that were identified. And this really, the summary was really to bring back the learnings to Australia from those who we saw were a front runner in the circular economy transition, and those sharing of knowledge could potentially help accelerate and possibly leapfrog our own transition in Australia. So it's really just to draw from the experience of those who were ahead of us. Most important out of those streams on the side there would probably be procurement, and also looking at what sorts of economic instruments. But we really have had the privilege and the pleasure to engage with all of those subject areas. So it was what it started out as is pretty much what it's been achieved, but so much more. We've just learned so much. It's been phenomenal, and I'll get to that in a second. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. So the knowledge that I'll be speaking to today, of course, building on the knowledge that we all had to start off with, but this is our meeting schedule. So we've had the first week of the tour has been spent in the Netherlands from the 22nd to the 26th of May. And with that particular agenda, it was a fairly packed itinerary, with including governments at all levels, national, regional and municipal. We also had NGOs, and we also had industry and site visits. So that was the first week. We also had a couple of site visits to see particularly built environment examples of how circular economy principles have been applied. And these were really insightful because many of them we'd been introduced to on photos, but actually having the opportunity to tour, of course, is such a different experience. What it started out as is pretty much what it's been achieved, but so much more. We've just learned so much. It's been phenomenal, and I'll get to that in a second. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. The second week was last week, which is where this World Circular Economy was held in Helsinki. And there we also had the opportunity to meet with the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a presentation and dialogue. In addition to the World Circular Economy Forum, obviously we had the chance to have a look at some of the infrastructure that was around Helsinki as well. And one thing that stood out for me there was seeing waste to energy plants right in the middle of the city, which of course in Australia would be not necessarily accepted in the local context. Next slide, thanks Flavia. And so far we've been in Sweden just really since Monday, and of course yesterday was a public holiday with Swedish National Day. So we've just had 3 meetings so far on Monday, and we've had a few what I'd call site visits, not guided site visits, but we've been wandering through the Gamlastan, taking in some of the wonderful photographic exhibition that's available for the King in his 50th year. The wonderful examples of municipal solid waste collection, and just a small example of not cleaning rooms every day in Stockholm. So we have the choice of when you want to clean your rooms to save on resources. So a couple of examples there. But next slide, Flavia. But yesterday was a highlight, being Swedish National Day, where we got to go to the Skansen village, and hopefully this slide works. If there's a play button on your end, Flavia, to see some special guests. So we saw the King and Queen going by at Skansen village to celebrate the Swedish National Day. And then lo and behold, the Crown Princess was there as well with her family. So amazing to be able to see the royalty of Sweden right there in front of us. I mean, to consider that in perhaps in the UK wouldn't necessarily be in that format. So it was a delightful way to be incorporated. Oh, and Swedish meatballs as well, of course, for dinner. So yeah. So next slide. Thanks, Flavia. But the real focus of this presentation is talking about the World Circular Economy Forum. So for those who are not familiar, it's kind of like the Olympics of the circular economy. Since 2017, it's been held alternate years in Helsinki and then in another location. For example, last year it was held in Rwanda in Africa. This year it's been in Helsinki. Next year it will be in Brussels. So it does move around. This year there were 2 days of the main forum plus 2 days of what's called accelerator sessions. And there were over 8,000 participants. And the format is that 2,000 thereabouts are invited to be there in person. And there was another 6,000 or so that were registered online. And in comparison, Paul was able to attend the World Circular Economy Forum in 2019. And some of the stats from there were that it was 2 days of forum again, but only 1 day of accelerator. And there were 2,200 attendees, and that was up from 1,500 in 2017. So you can see the amount of interest that is reflected in that growing number of particularly online attendees who are keen to learn and just adopt some of these principles that are being shared. It's the scale of interest was really quite fascinating for me to be able to see. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. To give you a bit of a sense of the topics in play for the program, we had finance, nature-based themes, and also circular trade were common themes across the 2 days of the main forum. Education was also included, and some specific material flows. And I've included the program link on the slides, which we'll share with you for reference. But it was interesting to see the focus, particularly on nature-based themes, and I think that's evident of the global discussion that biodiversity and regeneration is a very strong principle of the circular economy, and it is being adopted quite widely across many different sectors. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. Some of the companies that were presenting, and again, this to me identified the level of the level of commitment and financing, particularly with many of these companies showcased here, the World Trade Organization, the European Investment Bank, the World Economic Forum. These are major brands who are all there presenting on circular economy and how it is being integrated into their daily practices, including Tetra Pak, who was on stage, and being able to hear some of the lessons of what's being adopted in that sphere. So really high level organizations taking this seriously. And I think this goes to the next slide. Thanks, Flavia. That it is a global discussion. Sometimes we feel when we're in Australia that we're sort of looking at the local context, but of course, all of you having Swedish connections, you would be very much aware of the European dialogue. But for us in the group, it really helped to solidify and just build that confidence that we are very much part of a global conversation that's taking place on circular economy. So from all corners of the globe, but we don't yet have a number of countries represented, both in attendees and in presenters. But the people that I saw were everything from everywhere, from Pakistan to Chile to the United States, Canada, countries in South America, many countries in Africa. So it really is really quite fascinating and exciting to see the level of interest from those countries. To start with some reflections, I wanted to just highlight that the opening plenaries were really quite focused on finance. And Nicola Pochettino from the European Investment Bank started off one of his comments by saying that traditional linear models often prioritise, and I've got a spelling mistake there, short-term profits over long-term sustainability. I found this really quite interesting because this is the European Investment Bank recognising that the traditional models that prioritise over short-term profits, but this is a bank that over the years one would assume that they've been financing these traditional models, and they're now saying that that's not necessarily the way forward. So when you've got an investment bank that's making this public statement, to me it really reflected and highlighted that we've got significant investment and significant shifts taking place at the highest level. Next slide. Thanks, Flavia. And the example of the European Investment Bank, they're really putting their money where their mouth is. In his presentation, Nicola from the EIB showcased that their investments in circular economy innovation has been about 3.4 billion euro over the last 5 years. And 1.1 of that has actually been in 2022. So we can see that there is a significant investment being placed. Now, how those investments are supported and what the criteria are for calling their investments circular economy investments, I'm not sure of that. But again, to be up on stage and saying that they're investing this level of money in circular economy based project. Oh, are you still hearing me okay? Yeah, okay. It is really quite a strong indicator of the level of adoption of the circular economy principles. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. Another one from the European Investment Bank was Ambroise Fayol. Great, thank you. Who was talking about costing externalities into their risk profile. So he was saying that as we've realised that integrating climate considerations and environmental and social externalities into their assessment, they're actually seeing that the circular solution is actually often cheaper and sometimes less riskier. So, it goes against what people tend to call with circular economy transitions or circular economy business models, that there's too much risk involved, that it's going to be a very costly exercise. Well, here we're seeing, again, a high-level European investment banker saying, in fact, we're seeing the opposite. So, again, it reinforces that we're seeing finance as a very strong driver of the transition. Ambrose also spoke about next slide, thanks, Flavia, also spoke about a meeting held with the multilateral development banks. They met for the first time to discuss circular economy in Helsinki this week. And so this is the African Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Investment Bank, the Inter-American Bank, and the World Bank. So again, all of the global financiers are really taking this quite seriously to be able to recognise that we've got this triple planetary crisis, we've got climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution as the three sort of the helix, if you will, of planetary impacts. And they're seeing that the circular economy is a really important tool to be able to address those three challenges that we're generating. So it was really quite clear also from this was reiterated when we visited in the Netherlands that both public and private funding is being allocated with significant resources to enable the implementation of some of these projects to circular economy innovation. So it really, is quite fascinating to see that there are criteria and there's language around this level of investment. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. One more, which I thought was really, we all agreed in the group that this was the sort of one of the quotes of the forum. And this is Valerie Hickey from the World Bank. She just said it so well. We cannot recycle our way out of a linear economy. And then she recognised that there will be waste, which there will be, but we do need to have some better financial mechanisms to improve the outcomes and what we can do with that waste and hopefully minimise it in the future. Valerie was another one that mentioned this externalities. So, when we're talking about externalities, it's going beyond climate and actually putting a price on the resources that we're extracting from the planet in order for us to put products onto the shelf. It was really quite fascinating. Valerie also mentioned on that point that she said we have to fix externalities that have led to pricing differentials, and we need to improve the use. By improving the usage of materials, it also means that we're incorporating and engaging with micro, small and medium enterprises. And these enterprises, she mentioned, can be supported by the likes of the World Bank and others through various partner programs to support circular business models. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. The organisers used a poll on the end, I think it was the end of day 2, to get some words that people thought were necessary for a circular economy future. Collaboration, right in the middle there, most common. But we've also got things like degrowth. We've also got comments like trust. Trust was a common theme that was presented throughout the forum as well. And when you look at it, collaboration and trust go hand in hand. But again, the group agreed that the word is powerful, but we need to see more examples of collaboration in practice and how we can activate that. There were many great examples that we heard of in the Netherlands, having the opportunity to talk one-on-one with a number of stakeholders. But they all said, yes, it can be done. It's not easy. It's a complex system, but being able to build that trust was a really important element of the collaboration story. There was another word on there that was quite interesting. Sufficiency was another one that was quite interesting as well, that people were talking about, what sort of level of extraction, how are we extracting resources, and can we be far more efficient with taking sufficient resources rather than over extracting and over producing. One of the themes that was also talked about, or perhaps wasn't there as much as what I thought it might have been, was the elephant in the room, which was around, we actually need to look at reducing consumption as a key issue. There's some global targets. For example, WWF have a target around halving consumption. It was a topic that was, this reduction as the first point in the ladder of circularity wasn't necessarily spoken about as much, but I think that's something that we do need to have a consideration of, because at the end of the day, reducing the consumption of resources is what's going to be able to reduce our impact and improve the outcomes for the future. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. So these are the key summary, key learnings that I reflected on since we left Helsinki on Saturday. Carbon neutrality was mentioned quite a bit, of course, and decarbonisation. But full carbon neutrality can only be achieved through a transition to a circular economy. In particular, we heard from Finland, from their Ministry of Environment, and we were shared the. They have what's called a what is the word that they used? A government resolution that states the vision of the strategic program to promote a circular economy in Finland is that in 2025, they see a carbon neutral circular economy society as the foundation of a successful economy in Finland. Again, this is a government document that's talking about a carbon neutral and circular economy. Again, it's that high level of dedication and commitment that we're seeing out of the European countries. As I mentioned, pricing of externalities was spoken about, and this pricing of externalities is reflected in tender documents, for example, but also industry representatives were talking about how they're incorporating or starting to think about how are they going to incorporate this externality cost as they're looking at design briefs for products. Incorporating it into the various system approaches to not just putting products on a market, but having that sense of responsibility at end of life. And of course, we're seeing responsibility come to light in extended producer responsibility in Europe, and particularly with the eco design regulations that are coming out of Europe, and the taxonomy being released in Europe next, I think it's later this month. And again, many of you from Swedish connections on the call would be aware of those. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But financing was a really common theme. And as I mentioned, the concept of risk was also spoken about in collaboration with finance. And as we saw from the European Investment Bank announcements, significant funds are being allocated. In the Netherlands, we saw some 600 plus projects from the Enterprise Agency that were being funded that can be considered circular economy projects. And that's both from Netherlands funding sources, but also from European funding. And interesting with the risk conversation, Anthony Mayong, who's the Director of Climate Change and Green Growth for the African Development Bank, he was talking about the issue of risk, and he was saying the perceived risk is quite high, but the actual risk is low. And what they're seeing from the African Development Bank is a guarantee fund being supported from the UK worth $2 billion US to cover the investments to enable this innovation to be supported in the African context. So another, $2 billion from a country to be able to support and de-risk investments. And really what this shows is that these large multilateral development banks, they're looking to absorb some of that risk for companies, and that then opens other purse strings. Of course, when you've got a foundation set of funds, then others are willing to take the risk as well. So over time, we'll see this level of financing and this nuanced approach to financing as a really important lever to create that innovative technology. We also saw high-level engagement is really quite critical to what's called the front-runner success. We saw this in Finland, but we also saw it in the Netherlands. What we're seeing is government bodies adopting and embracing and indeed incorporating circular economy language into both their policies, and also in Finland, we saw that government document released. Predominantly the governments are working on policies. There's not too many regulations at this point. However, the European Union eco-design regulations coming in later this year, this will be a highly influential lever to drive circular design. And no doubt many of you on the call are aware of this, but essentially, if you're selling into European markets, you do need to be aware of the eco-design regulations coming in. It's across a range of products, because if your products don't align to the regulation, you really do risk being left behind and potentially being left out of the European market. So I recommend, if you haven't already, have a deep dive into how these regulations will affect your current product design, and how that might need to be shifted for the future. For us, that was quite an exciting realization. We heard that from a representative from the European Union. We had a meeting one-on-one, or one on 9 of us or 10 of us. And there has the potential, because the European market is so significant, it has the potential to really drive design of products that incorporate recycled content, but moreover can be circulated within the economy in a far more efficient way. So if you're designing quite complex products in the future, you'll see that those products will have less appeal and potentially not be accepted in the European market. So when you think about that in a global context, it was really, wow, this is a game changer. So keep an eye out for that. Also, a strong focus on value chains. Being able to have a value chain approach rather than individual product lines really came into this question of being able to trace the flows. What we're seeing in the circular economy, of course, is a system approach to being able to have, consider the impacts across the chain. And so if we're only looking at a standalone, well, my product, technically is circular, you can't really claim that a product in and of itself is circular, because there's a value chain that enables the production of that material. So working in systems and that value chain approach was commonly spoken about in the sessions, and also in the accelerator sessions as well. SMEs were a strong focus in the Netherlands, and a number of programs to support different sectors were funding some of these accelerator programs, were enabling that innovation from a value chain perspective. So I think that's something that was really quite interesting for us. And another really intriguing comment that was made from Kone, which is the company that make elevators and travelators and these kinds of things, is how demography will inform the design of their products for the future. The number of people that are aged 65 and older is expected to double over the next 3 decades to reach 1.6 billion people in 2050. Now, what does that mean for circularity? Well, when we're designing elevators, escalators, even other mobility aids, when we're talking about the contribution that Kone make to hospitals, it's something that we do need to consider, that we're going to need more of these materials and these products in our existence, because people will be aging. But how do we make those designs much more circular? And Kone is really seems to be a front runner in this. Their chair made a really fascinating comment on a short video that was presented. The chairman of Kone said, "What's the point of growing?" And I'm guessing of growing product lines if the planet is dying. So what's the point of growing if the planet is dying? So it really does showcase that, again, another large organization from Finland is taking this quite seriously and recognizing the opportunities. It's not just about, oh no, we've got to make all these changes. There's actually opportunities for businesses if they start to look at what are the impacts for the future. And finally, the front runners are really ahead, but in the case of the Netherlands and Finland, they both say, quite frankly, that they've got a long way to go. And I think that, having this frankness and reality that, yes, we're front runners, yes, we've got strategies and policies in place, but we do have, it is a complex space, and it's not easy. But having those aspirations and those structures, they're just getting on with it. And from what we've seen, Australia is doing a better job than this time last year. But we could still say that we're probably about average amongst the other developed countries that we saw in the forum. So these are just a few summary highlights. I mean, it's a lot to take in, you can imagine, over 4 days. But you know, we did have a bit of a debrief, and these were some of the common themes. One other one that I didn't put on that list is the importance of education, both from professional development and informal education, but also from structured tertiary education. And what are the opportunities for people to learn and be qualified in their ability to engage with circular economy business models? That was another strong theme that was coming through, and something that we're focused on or looking to focus on with the Australian Circular Economy Hub. So next slide, thanks, Flavia. So where to from here? As I mentioned, there's a lot going on. We've still got and the rest of this week in Sweden, and then Paul and I are split to go between Paris and the UK to complete our study tour. We'll regroup when we get back with the members. We've got some reporting to do to some of the folk who supported us in developing our itinerary for the tour. We're looking to share learnings, and that's just not just from the ACE Hub, but collectively as a group. And I should also add that there were 21 Australians in total in Finland, representing state-based organisations, NGOs, private sector. So it was quite a strong contingent, and there'll be many learnings. So look out for more events, both from us and others who are in attendance, to share some of those learnings and showcase some of the imagery that we have as well. Next slide, thanks, Flavia. I wanted to share this find from the Nobel Museum on Sunday in the Gamlestad, from Marie Curie, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1903 and again in chemistry in 1911. The bottom part of that slide, I really think, is where we need to consider ourselves for the future of a circular economy. Nothing in life is to be feared, it's only to be understood. And we do need to understand what's involved in a circular economy. So now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. Now, this was a quote from her life in the early 1900s, and here we are in 2023 looking to understand more about this transition to what we see in a circular economy. Two more quick slides. The next one, Flavia, is just to, if I can make a shameless plug for Circularity, which is our annual conference taking place this year in Melbourne on the 20th and 21st of November. We do have abstracts open for submission until the 15th of June. So if you've got a project that you'd like to share the story of on the stage, you can submit those, and we'll be releasing ticket information in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that on various socials, particularly on LinkedIn. And with that, Flavia, the last slide, just to say thank you again for choosing to spend your hour this afternoon with us. I invite you to join the portal, which is the ACE Hub portal, which is kind of like LinkedIn, but just for circular economy discussions. It's free to join, and you can really keep up to date with the 1,700 or so members of the portal who are having great conversations, collaborating, networking, and above all, learning from each other how we can transition towards a circular economy in Australia, which, as Professor Kramer said, is a complex issue, but we can only do it when we work together and join forces. And I'll leave it there and open to questions. Thank you, Flavia.
Thank you, Nicole. Wow, that was a lot to take in, but it sounds like, you know, there was a lot of good energy, conversations, and progress, some progress. I'll start off the Q&A with probably an opening question while I give time for the rest of the participants to be ready with theirs. Here in Australia, and I think you covered a bit of this, when we have conversations about circular economy, it feels like we're very much stuck in the future. And being present in the discussions at WCEF, and you talked about the front runners that are leading. What are some of the things that we can learn from the front runners that are leading?
Yeah, I might just say, Flavia, we're seeing one of your screen of Teams, not everybody's. Yep, there you go. Perfect. Thank you. What are we learning from the front runners? That you just need to get on with it. You just need to start. we're learning that being able to collaborate is important. We're learning that it doesn't always work the first time, and that's okay. That pilot projects are an important piece of the puzzle because we're able to, test out ideas. A lot of what we're seeing that's needed for the future is not yet designed. They're concepts that are not around, but we do also have some good examples of circular business models that have been around a very long time, but they might not be called circular business models. For example, product as a service is a viable circular business model that's been promoted by Accenture and the OECD and others. But product as a service is essentially a subscription service, or it could be a leasing service. We've used car leasing for many years for corporates, for example, where the product is the car and the product provides us with the function of mobility. And the service is that we're able to pay for a leasing on that to use that particular product. And we see that now in elevators. Kone was one of the providers of lift as a service in Amsterdam at the Circle building, where you're paying per lift, not you paying for the whole lift system. You're actually paying for the amount of usage on the lift. There's also the same sort of model in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, where Philips have about 20% of their business model now is lighting as a service. So you don't pay for the lighting infrastructure, you're actually paying for the amount of lumens that you're using. Again, these are all new business models, and the Philips example has been in Schiphol, I think Johan Prommel said, for about 6 or 7 years. And we're now coming to the point where we're looking at, well, how is that design going to the next stage in the value chain? So it's testing and trying things out and trying to create an environment that's brave enough to support that, which we're seeing with some of these investments. So yeah, that's what I'd say as what can we learn from the front runners. Just get started.
And if I could just join in as well, Nicole, the other thing I realised is that they have incredible resources amongst their government instrumentalities. So we estimate in the Dutch government, which that remember the Netherlands is not as big an economy as Australia, but they have like hundreds of people working on it amongst their various departments, and they have a coordinating ministry who is obviously making sure that everyone's working to the same end objective, but each ministry is applying circular economy thinking within their own ministry. So that's, I think, a crucial thing. And again, the same sort of thing in Amsterdam council. Effectively, they had not only a lot of sustainability people. I think she said there was 180 sustainability people, and 10 of them were dedicated to the circular economy. And that's in a city that's about just under 900,000 people. So if you compare that to, say, our Brisbane City Council, which is 1.1 million, there was significant, and they would have nowhere near that. They may have 10 people in sustainability if you're lucky. So I think that having the adequate resourcing, and that's what I'm taking as a learning from, I'm on the newly formed Circular Economy Ministerial Advisory Group, which advises our Environment Minister and also our Industry Minister. And that's a really key learning for me, is that we've got to have sufficient resources if we're going to execute on this transition that we've now made a commitment by 2030. So we've got a lot of more resourcing to be brought into the equation.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I mean, I think that's a great point. I do have another question on collaborations, but I do see Linda on the line, and she has a question. So Linda, if you could just introduce yourself and where you come from, for the benefit of Nicole and Paul, that'd be great. Over to you, Linda.
Sorry, I was on mute. So my name is Linda Nordin, and I am Swedish. I work for SMEC as a senior associate consultant, and my specialty is circular economy. My background, though, is in waste management, and I have a question. So actually, two questions. So the one thing I was thinking, in Australia, what would you say that they're doing? I mean, I got some understanding myself, but in general in Europe, do you see them implementing circular economy as its own strategy, policy-wise? In Australia, we mainly have circular economy established from the National Waste Action Plan. Do you think that it's important to establish circular economy as its own document and program? And is that how Europe is doing it? Shall we start with that? Then I have another question.
Yeah, sure, Linda. I think what we're seeing is certainly for the Netherlands and Finland, they have a strategy for circular economy, recognizing that it is a document that sits, and they do have an action plan, implementation plan under that as well. The policy is really, the interesting part, as Paul mentioned, is the policy is there, often implemented or enacted, if you will, through the Ministry of Environment, but it's integrated into pretty much all of the ministries that we saw. It's really widespread that everybody's working to the same hymn book. So I think if you don't have a circular economy strategy, and like we have in Australia, it's incorporated into the National Waste Action Plan, it enables, or it almost still keeps circular economy as a waste issue. And it's actually far more than a waste issue. It's a design opportunity. It is an economic opportunity, and it is something that we need to move out of the recycling discussion and push it back upstream. And I think that's what I've seen with these strategies from the countries that we've been engaged with while we've been over here, is that having a strategy that is a government strategy enables that cross-departmental adoption and implementation. So hopefully that's something that we can draw on for the Australian example.
And just to give you the Australian context, that's why the ministers formed this Circular Economy Ministerial Advisory Group, because as you pointed out, Linda, it is just seen through a waste and recycling lens. So we're being tasked by the end of next year to come up with a circular economy framework, which is then designed to form policy and or legislation. That's to be determined by the government. And so, for example, and the difference between policy and legislation, they're both really good signals to the market. Obviously, recently the Ireland has gone down the legislative route with a circular economy law. That I think is obviously even more powerful, but at the same day, you just got to make sure that everyone's aware that this is absolutely a top priority for society, and government does that through the policy, the legislation, and obviously resourcing, whether it be finance resourcing, people implementing, programs, all those sorts of things which can drive the change, and also demonstrate to companies, industry, and the general public that this is an important issue. So I think
I think one of the examples of that, because at one time you can have a strategy and a policy, and that, as Paul said, that can inform the market and inspire the market to make shifts, but supporting that both with funding. So the accelerator program that we saw in the Netherlands was an excellent example of how companies can actually apply to get support. So yes, the market might not necessarily be mature enough to support some of these new business models, but there are actually mechanisms and levers that can help to, particularly with small business, but also larger organisations, to get those new business models up and running, to be able to achieve the targets in those policy documents. So yeah. Your second question, Linda.
Am I allowed to say and ask another question? So that's actually sort of leaning into my other question, which is that in Australia, there is a lot of talk and focus on creating circular economy precincts and hubs around the country. But at the end of the day, when you work on this and you look at what can go in and what companies can be positioned into these precincts, there is I guess a level of viability to make it financially viable as well. And at the end of the day, that's what drives business to function. And you were talking about the accelerator program there for the Netherlands. But have you seen, I guess, what I really wanted to ask, have you seen a functional circular economy precinct established yet in Europe, where you can see industrial symbiosis and all of these different actions actually happening and functioning? Has that been,
Yeah, there are a few examples actually. Again, drawing on the Netherlands, Groningen, one of the major ports in the Netherlands. It's to the north of Amsterdam. Excuse my pronunciation for anyone that's Dutch on the call. But this is, there was a presentation from one of the members of their sort of a business association, if you will. Fantastic example of industrial symbiosis that we can draw on, and it's extending. The ability to create social license within that particular region was really important, because that being a port, of course, there's a lot of chemical exchange, which a number of products are coming out of that precinct. But we also saw there's a precinct just outside Schiphol Airport, which we didn't get the chance to see, but it was very much spoken about as an example. We were trying to get there to actually go and have a site visit. I can get the name of it and share that with you. But
I think that would be very interesting. It's interesting always when you talk about these things and you want to perhaps convince that that's the way forward. It's always good to have a few good examples, that can show the way and show the light that it's possible and the vision is already happening elsewhere.
I think the one that I'm trying to remember the name of from Amsterdam sounded more like the special precinct zones from the New South Wales state government that are looking to be developed, because it's not a port. I mean, the ones that I've seen, Kwinana, this person from Groningen port, these are port facilities, and so you've got lots of chemical exchange, you've got fuels coming in. And so it makes sense to have that because there's so much activity. But when you've got land-based precincts, I think that we do need to capture those examples. There are others. I think there was one outside Leiden as well. But yeah, we can get those names and share with you.
Well.
And Helsinki, yeah.
And just on the subject of financing those, I don't know how many people are aware that the new National Reconstruction Fund, which is managed by the Department of Industry, so that'll be like an independent authority. As people have said, it's going to be a bit like our Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which has helped drive our renewable energy transition. And that, we're being told, it will have a circular economy lens. So in other words, they're going to be looking, and know there's various pots of money within that 15 billion. They're saying across that, whether it was a renewable energy investment or some other infrastructure or whatever, that it will have a circular economy lens. And I think that's one to watch out for as it gets formed. It's obviously been approved in the last budget, but it's got to be obviously created, and I think that'll happen by the end of the year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. I don't know if there's any other questions from our participants online. Because I have a couple more that I want to ask, and I might just go for it.
Go for it.
So on the topic of financing, I think there was, because I was listening to some of the recordings or live sessions, and there was a sentiment around future-proofing of investments. Any reflections on, what are some of the key principles discussed around that?
Yeah, I guess future-proofing is sort of de-risking in some ways, and I think the examples that I mentioned from the African Development Bank, there is a sense of fear around putting your money into developing new products where the markets are not quite there yet, chicken or the egg scenario. But I think what we're seeing from the European, but also these multilateral development banks more broadly, is that they recognise that this is a risky business, but they're actually willing to underpin it. So being able to de-risk through financing is one way of future-proofing. And I think the other thing that's quite interesting is there's a long-term vision It's not just, we've got a 1-year program and we'll see what happens in that 1 year. There seemed to be a longevity of at least 3 to 5 years, if not longer, in some of the visions of financing and financing models that were being discussed. So, yeah, I think the key takeaway there is that this isn't going away. In fact, it's only going to get more, because we recognize the amount of innovation that we need to be able to provide a more circular future with the resources that we have. Because, let's face it, the key reason why we're talking about a circular economy is because we're extracting far too many materials. 100 billion tons a year is just unsustainable. So it's the opportunities of what can be found in those different models that these funders are really quite interested and excited about, it seems.
And I think, Paul, you talked about government funding as well. And I think that mindset, hopefully is there as well with government funding, because as you say, there's a level of risk, and, companies are more open to, put up their hands for asking for funding if, there's a level of understanding with the risk factor. I might just move to my next question, and this is around collaboration. And collaboration was the biggest sentiment in the word cloud that you showed us. And I'm going to dial it back, because this has been on my mind, when we talk about circular economy, right? How do you start collaborating when you're at the stage of understanding the topic as well, right? And, as a business, you are trying to find like-minded individuals, is there, whether it's the ACE Hub, I saw in your roadmap, you talked about action project groups, what are some of the ways that companies can, a good starting point, for us to collaborate? First part of the question. And the second part is, what are some of the roadblocks that you're seeing that are preventing that from happening? Because I'm sure, most of the companies online, are interested in the topic and they want to, contribute more.
If I could just a sec, Nicole, because I think that's a really great question. And there's one thing that I think, I noticed, and it was reinforced to me from Dr. Jacqueline Kramer when she visited last year. I said, what have you really noticed mostly about Australia? And she said, well, you tend to put competition before collaboration, but in the Netherlands, it's the reverse. And I thought, well, is that true? But we experienced it. And they definitely are a more collaborative culture. I think the Finns are more collaborative. And maybe it's because you've got to get through tough winters and you're under sea level. It's those sorts of things, I suppose, force you to act in a more collaborative way. So I'm not saying they don't have competition, but I think that I saw just groups of companies just coming together, coalescing around an issue quite quickly. When we ask them questions, they see there's a problem, they come together to try to solve it. And yeah, sure, the government can be involved as well. But often it is just, for example, there's a new product stewardship system for textiles coming in the Netherlands. And I asked the person from the government, how hard was it to get the companies involved in? And we do product stewardship in Australia, and sometimes it's hard. You'll get 2 or 3 companies are interested and the rest are not, out of a, industry of say 20 companies. So he said it was actually quite easy. They see it's a major issue. It's a social license issue, blah, blah. And really, he said 80, 90% of the market came in very quickly. Sure, that he said there's always a few recalcitrants, who'll have to come in via the legislation. But I think that's a crucial thing that it's about collaboration is you in your own mindset, you've got to want to collaborate. There's no point in saying, like, we've got an amazing collaboration portal, but if you don't join it, how can you collaborate?
I think that's the takeaway. That's a shameless plug, Flavia. If you don't know where to start, get into the portal, just introduce yourself, and you'll be amazed with the responses that people will provide. The portal is there to learn from each other, and it's just being brave to ask questions and recognize that we don't all have the answers, but we know that there are problems that need to be solved. And I think just being able to identify those problems, you asked about barriers. Financing is a barrier, but that's starting to be addressed in Australia. We're starting to see some banks having sustainability criteria that will actually guide whether or not you can get loans. We are seeing policy. Policy's always been a traditional barrier. That's starting to be shifting. So, we have a Circularity in Australian Business report that's produced every 2 years. It's being released in November. there are some really important barriers identified in there, but they're slowly but surely being addressed. And I think that's the exciting time. This is a marathon. Paul often says, you know, if you think of a marathon, you've got a couple of laps around the internal, you know, the stadium before you get out on the road. It's you know, it's a 40-year shift that we're doing, 42 kilometers, 42 years, let's call it that. But we do need to just get started, and I think that starts with asking questions and being brave. So get on the portal and ask them with 2 minutes to go.
Exactly. And with the practical example, just think of circular plastics, where you've got Coca-Cola and Asahi, or two cutthroat competitors, coming together to invest along with a waste recycling company and a packaging company, who they would just see as, you know, suppliers to them, to invest in major plants to recover PET in Australia and put them back into new bottles. That was, I don't think that would have happened 3 years ago. I honestly think that if someone would have said, what's the chance, I would have said 1,000,000 to 1. And that also, because of that collaboration, the federal government, through the Modern Manufacturing Fund, put some money in. See, so there's a classic example. If you show that there's a need, we need to bring more onshore processing. We as a group are recognising it, even though we're competitors, and then we go, here's our plan, and could the government support it? And it's been, and now the second plant is being built. The first plant was so successful, the second plant's being built. So, you know, it must be working.
And segue back to Camilla to close off.
Yes. Well, before that, thank you so much, Nicole, for your time, and Paul as well. You know, we wish you both a safe and pleasant trip ahead. Before we end, just a quick hand or a brief end note from Camilla Jennings, who's the General Manager of the Australian Chamber of Commerce, and who I must say is the driving force behind the chamber. So over to you, Camilla.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Nicole Garofano. Thank you so much, Paul Klemenko, for joining in from Stockholm as well. And thank you, Flavia. I'm also in Sweden, actually, although my background picture shows Sydney here, because I tried to change it to this beautiful scenery, which I have been spending my last few days in. So I'll see if I can add it in a different way as an added thing towards this event. But what I wanted to share is just some of our upcoming events within the chamber and also for the Sustainability Committee. So we have the Sydney Film Festival, which is actually started already. In the festival, it's a film called Climate Changers, and it's by Johan Gabrielsson, who has been the director of this, and Tim Flannery is presenting in this film. And there will be a special session on the 17th of June. In September, we are organizing an executive forum on the 6th of September, and that is also going to be followed by a networking event. And the following day, on the 7th of September, the SACC Sustainability Committee will host a roundtable about sustainable food and beverage systems. Following that, I also wanted to just highlight that we have on the 23rd of November, we will host our Business Awards event, and that's held in Sydney. And we will shortly have the entries for entering the awards up on our website. So just keep an eye out for that. And thank you so much, everybody. And we hope to see you at our next event. So thank you.
Thanks, Camilla. Thanks, Flavia.